Hello, I'm Anaboltus, and today I want to talk about the socialist idea that I've heard about the abolition of what one might call janitors or other personnel involved in dedicated cleaning duties. Now, before I get really into that, I'd like to say that when we look at the advancement of human civilization, there are a few different ways to view it. But one way that I think is very important is looking at it in the sense of an increase in the division of labor and diversifying how labor is accomplished and the different roles that exist in labor. And what you see is that the fundamental different kinds of professions that existed in the classical era are greater than those that existed in the pre-classical era. Then in the medieval era, greater than that in the classical era, and in the modern era, greater than that in the medieval era. So what we see is an increase in complexity. And one particular area that I think is very obvious, especially recently in the last 2 centuries, what we see, or even the last 1 century, is advancements in medicine have led to a diversification in the types of medical professionals. So back 200 years ago, there used to be doctor barbers, and nowadays you've got, of course, barbers are now generally a separate profession, but what you have is general practitioners, you've got brain surgeons, you've got heart surgeons, you've got nurse practitioners, you've got licensed nurses, you've got all sorts of phlebotomists, all sorts of different medical professions that even 100 years ago there weren't that many. And the reason that this happens is because as science advances and as philosophy advances, as the science and philosophy of the medical profession advances, what you end up with is a situation that there's too much knowledge and too much expertise for any one person to reliably be trained in and to have in a short amount of time. And instead, what you need is to diversify the professions so that there's different types of people that accomplish different medical roles. And we see that in any type of profession. You also see that in programming, if you want to go even more recently, where there has been a diversification in different types of programmers as there have been advancements in the science and the philosophy of programming. And in smiths as well, we see that. Now, of course, there's also the element of automation, in which we build a machine that accomplishes a very specific task, which then eliminates the need for a human to accomplish such a task as had been done in the past. So we see that in agriculture as well. And that's why there aren't as many farmers proportionally in highly developed countries as there used to be. So why am I bringing this up? The reason I'm bringing this up is because one example of progress here is that of the janitor. The janitor is an element of this progress. Now, that being said, what do the socialists want? The socialists, let me just be very clear. Not all socialists, okay? I understand that there's different types of socialists, but I've heard this more than once, so this isn't certainly a unique opinion that one person has said. So I've heard this from multiple sources. They don't come to mind right now, so... but let me just say that if you don't agree that this is your position as a socialist, don't go to me, go find someone who actually holds this position and complain to them. But there's a particular opinion that some socialists have that under a more socialist system, perhaps even under communism, you would have a situation where there would no longer be a need for janitors or for other dedicated cleaning personnel, because all the workers would collectively keep their workplace clean. Now, that being said, that's not a novel concept in the sense that this is historically how most things were done, that usually people would have multiple roles in their work. And I, as someone who has been in the workforce, know this as well. I'll give you two examples here. When I was doing taxes, I, of course, had to keep my workplace clean. Now, of course, in a small office, that's not necessarily too difficult. However, in a more hectic situation, I was working at a deli, and of course, I had to frequently wash my hands and had to ensure that everything was clean, because in food services, it's important to ensure that the food that people are eating is clean food that is good to eat. And also there's a bunch of regulations put on top of that as well. And on top of that, you also have things that the company wants for its standards and practices. So you've got all those different things, which mean that when you're working in the food industry, you have 100 different considerations relating to cleanliness that you always have to be aware of every day that you work. So that being said, I'm saying that I'm not unfamiliar with this concept. I have experienced having to keep things clean while performing a different primary job role. I have experienced that. So people that would complain saying, oh, you're just lazy, I've done this, okay? I've done this. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing necessarily, because I think that in a small working place, that is something that it is perhaps better than hiring a whole other person to clean up throughout the day. Now, in a large working place, though, if you're in a factory, maybe you're at a convention center, maybe some other large working place, maybe a military facility, something large, it's generally better to have a dedicated cleaning person, to have someone particular to clean rather than someone generally to clean. Because what you're doing when you do that is you are allowing people who have other jobs other than cleaning to actually spend more time doing those jobs and spend more time building their skills in those jobs to become greater experts in those jobs. At the same time, you're also allowing the cleaning personnel to spend time doing their jobs and to become experts in their jobs, and to increase their expertise, increase their skill, increase the quality of their work. Because if you do it the other way, in a large working place, what you're doing is you're essentially splitting up the workload inside their brains. And with the idea of neuroplasticity, with how your mind changes to adapt to things, they won't improve in skill as fast doing two different things. And depending on their level of intelligence, they might not actually be able to be excellent at two things at once. Now, there are people that are able to be excellent at very many things at once, but I'm just saying that if, let's say, you've got an accountant, that person might be really good at accounting, but maybe not as good at other things. There are different skill sets that people have, and different expertises that these people have, and some people go into certain fields to do certain things that if you're then pushing another role on top of them, that person might not be as good at doing that. So it's better, in my opinion, to have someone who has that dedicated particular job, so that you can actually diversify and increase the overall expertise of everyone in the workplace in a greater sense. And I think this is another example of this progress that I'm talking about the diversification of experiential roles. I think that's a good way to describe it. Rather than saying a job, that's a very simplistic way to describe it. An experiential role, because this is something that you learn, that you experience, and that you get good at over the course of several years, similarly to any other profession. So in this idea of experiential roles, what you ultimately have is the socialist opposition. And what do the socialists say? They reject this progress, and instead they say, well, why don't we collectivize it? Why don't we collectivize it? And to me, it seems like they might even have a disdain for janitors, as maybe thinking of it as a not as good a profession, probably because they might not necessarily get paid as much as other people. But that doesn't mean that they are unimportant. But the problem that, of course, I have with that is that this is counter to the demonstrable progress of society, to the trends in society that lead to progress, and that is an increase in diversification of professions, an increase in the division of labor, whether it be by diversification of profession or whether it be by automation, which, in my opinion, would be an adequate replacement if it were possible, because that might increase the efficiency and therefore allow for an even greater growth than there had previously been. And then because of that, what you have is whatever is being produced is or serviced is cheaper, and at that point, because it's cheaper, it's more available, and then the general standard of living goes up. But what if you instead put more responsibilities on people in the workplace to do something else? What then happens is that they become less efficient at their normal jobs. They spend more time doing something else than their actual jobs. And that, of course, means that whatever they're doing would become more expensive and less available. Therefore, it would not lead to an increase in the standard of living and for a general progress of society. So that's my opinion on that. What I'm saying is that we need janitors rather than collectivizing cleaning duties in large workplaces. I think that's more efficient, it is more conducive to progress, and it is more conducive to a higher standard of living in all of society. Now, of course, there's another example that people like to give. I didn't bring this one up right away because it's a very silly one, and I'd be surprised if anyone actually holds this position, and that is that physicians and all sorts of different professions should work part-time as farmers rather than doing their own jobs full-time. And there are some socialists that I hear hold these these opinions. I don't think that they're seriously being considered in a general milieu of socialism. So I don't think that that's necessarily something that needs to be addressed, but it would, in my opinion, be improper for the same reasons and more severe in the absurdity of the problems. So tell me what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you disagree with my idea that progress is caused by division of labor, or at least is confirmed by a division of labor? Tell me what you think. You feel free to contact me. You can donate on Patreon if you'd like. And always leave a comment. Leave a like if you like the video. Share the video with your friends if you think that it is something that is worth seeing. So thank you all for watching, and I'll be seeing you all next time on Awiltus over and out.